Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everyone is having an okay New Year's Eve. I know during this pandemic it has been difficult, but I hope that you guys are surviving and making it through during this pandemic. What do you have for New Year's? What goals do you have for 2021? Do you think 2021 was better than 2020? Let me know what you think. Make sure to comment below. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Make sure you click that notification bell so you can get notifications for each time I upload a video. Make sure to follow me on my Twitter and my Instagram. I will put those links in the description. So I've been seeing a lot on Twitter and on Instagram, people disrespecting Liberia and people really talking about Liberian history in a negative light. They often use Liberia as a justification as to why the diaspora should return to Africa or that African Americans have a superior mentality. And a lot of these viewpoints have a little bit of merit, but they are heavily misinformed. They lack context. And I'm here to just debunk a couple of these key arguments. So the first argument that I've noticed is people use the phrase the Americo Liberians had the white man's mentality. That is number one. Although it cannot be stated that the Americo Liberians did have a Eurocentric point of view and they did adopt a lot of Western clothing, Western ideology, they adopted American names, the similar American flag and American architecture. A lot of that doesn't have to deal with white supremacy as much as it deals with the ideology known as classical black nationalism. A man by the name of Wilson Jeremiah Moses wrote two books that discuss the two forms of black nationalism, modern black nationalism and classical black nationalism. This is very important because Liberia is going to fit into the concept of classical black nationalism, which is from the American Revolution to Marcus Garvey. As we focus into classical black nationalism, one of the distinctions from modern black nationalism is the creation of an African American nation state, as well as having a black Western republic and the Christianization of Africa and Africans. So we see with this form of black nationalism, it is not emphasized on indigenous Africans and African culture as much as it is more on Western culture and Western civilization. Wilson Jeremiah Moses further goes in depth in modern black nationalism, and you can also find this on a Medium article, that the primary distinction with modern black nationalism and classical black nationalism is modern black nationalism deals with the Africanization. And we see that today with Kwanzaa, adopting African names, adopting the Orishas. This comes from the modern black nationalist thinking, whereas originally, when Liberia was created, it was the classical black nationalist perspective. And this is important to understand the context of the situation and how Liberia folded to the way that it did throughout its years from 1847 and to the present day. Number two, Liberia was an imperial colonial project. Now, where we get the land from Liberia comes from the fact that the Monroe administration, James Monroe, in 1819, allotted over 100,000 US dollars to buy land on the coast of Africa. Originally, they went to Sierra Leone, but they were rejected by the British, and so they went further south into what we know today as Liberia. It was also known as the Pepper Coast, and we call where they landed at Cape Matsurato. This is where Monrovia is. It used to be called Christopolis. But the founding of the American Colonization Society was by a man by the name of Robert Finley. He founded the ACS in 1816. Now, what people forget, or what people completely forget out, is that Robert Finley contacted a man by the name of Paul Cuffy. Now, who was Paul Cuffy? Paul Cuffy was the wealthiest black man at the time. He was a man of black and Native American heritage. And he was an advocate that African Americans should trade with Africa and develop, trade rules, trade connections. And he even used his own money to send over 38 African Americans to Freetown, Sierra Leone. And a further interest with that is that Sierra Leone, especially the city of Freetown, is the oldest capital to be founded by African Americans, which was founded in 1787 with the help of a man by the name of Thomas Peters and the Black Poor when they went to England. So we see already right there that this Back to Africa movement and the creation of an African American nation state was going well earlier than when Robert Finley and the American Colonization Society formed in 1816. We would have to go even as far back as 1763, when Granville Town, Sierra Leone, was the first attempt to repatriate African Americans to the continent. Number 3, African Americans did not develop Liberia, and as a result, Liberia is one of the poorest countries in the world. This is a heavily misinformed point of view that does not, once again, include context. It does not understand historical accuracies. It does not really go into depth as to why that happened. It is estimated that about 14,000 to as much as 20,000 African Americans went to Liberia. For those who do not understand, there were about 400,000 free blacks in the 1860s. There were over 4 million African Americans in the entire country. So we are talking about less than 2% of all free blacks and a really minute, minuscule amount of the entire black population that went to Liberia. If you've ever read a book about Daniel Bashir Warner, or if you've done research on Daniel Bashir Warner, he was the 3rd president of Liberia. He was concerned about the immigration of African Americans to Liberia, that there were not enough. There weren't enough African American immigrants coming into Liberia to industrialize and allow for a population to grow and the economy to grow. So an example would be a man by the name of Benjamin Singleton, after the Civil War during Reconstruction, got the signatures of over 98,000 African Americans, men, women, and children, to allow for them to go to Liberia. The Exodusters, who fled to Kansas, wanted to go to Liberia, but it was not financially feasible. You have the Liberian Exodus on the bark Azor that wanted to send over 160,000 African Americans to Liberia over 40 years. You had the Greater Liberia Act of 1939 that got 400,000 signatures to as much as 2 million African American signatures. So what we see right here is not that African Americans did not have the desire to go back to Africa or return back to Africa, but that African Americans simply did not have the resources, the funding, and the economics behind to actually sustain that Back to Africa movement compared to Europeans that were immigrating to America or Asians that we see coming in today after the Immigration Act of 1965. Number 4, African Americans enslaved the natives. This is one of the constant things you will see on Twitter and on Instagram. While it has to be acknowledged that there were many tensions between the Americos and the indigenous, what people fail to understand is that there was not a policy, a law, or a constitutional amendment that allowed slavery. As a matter of fact, many of the indigenous tribes were still selling slaves. And we can verify this by Maya Angelou being of the Mende tribe and Oprah Winfrey being of the Pele tribe. Many tribes such as the Mende, the Pele, and Geo were constantly waging war against other tribes. This dispels the myth of the homogeneous indigenous Liberians. There was the Kondo Confederation that included the Bai and Day tribes. There was the Bassa Kingdom. There were the Kru, who were reluctant to sell their people into slavery. So this idea that the Americo Liberians enslaved the natives is not accurate, with the exceptions of the Fernando Po situation in the 1920s to the 1930s that resulted in the resignation of Charles D.B. King and his vice president, and maybe the exception of the 1887, if you look at Little America in Africa on JSTOR, where they go into this, there was not an enslavement of the Americo Liberians to the natives. That is factually incorrect. It has no basis and is really based on Western stereotypes and perceptions of Africa. And last but not least is that African Americans don't have a claim to Liberia. African Americans have as much claim to Liberia as any other nation in this entire planet. The country of Liberia, not to be confused with the region of Liberia, was founded by African Americans. It gained its independence on 1847, and the first African American president ever, Joseph Jenkins Roberts, was elected on January 3rd, 1848. Robert Johnson, the founder of BET, created a hotel resort, the RLJ Hotel Resort in Liberia, for the purposes of investing in Liberia. And he even writ and said that African Americans should have a close connection to Liberia the way that Jews look at Israel. I will be creating a further series to debunk these myths of Liberian history and to correct the narrative, to bridge the gap between African Americans and Liberians. African Americans and Liberians have a continuous struggle and similar bond. We have faced racism, colonialism, the scramble for Africa, and we survived. Make sure you like the video. Down below, I will have some of the research that I've done. I will have some links in the description, access to some books. They also give you a preview on Google. So if you would like to look at some of the previews, go ahead and do that. If you let me know what you think. If you are a Liberian, what did you think about it? Was it something that I said that you never heard about? Is it something that interests you? Would you like to come on? Would you like to have a discussion about this? Let me know so that we can further bridge this connection that we have together.